So we definitely have extremes, and every single vintage, we need to be prepared to see something that we've never seen before. And unfortunately, that is a reality.
Welcome to The Next Generation, with me, your host, Giulia Stocchetti. Join me as I take you on a journey to discover young stars of the Italian food and wine world. Pronti? Andiamo!
Hello, hi everyone. So today I'm here with Santiago Marone Cinzano from Col d'Arcia Winery. And it's a kind of special occasion because we actually met here at Wine to Wine. And so I seized the moment for interviewing him because he is a really talented guy, full of new projects for the future. And so I'm so excited to know everything about him and his reality. So welcome to the pod, Santiago.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, for taking the time. And yes, this is actually my first time coming to Wine. Mm-hmm. And it's been great. This is the first day, but it's great for networking. Some really interesting and current themes have been tackled during the conferences. So you really feel like you're in the center of the decision making and what's happening in the wine world. A lot of very interesting people to speak to. So yeah, great place to do this.
Sounds great. I'm happy to hear that because the theme this year is like the AI, and it's something pretty new and something that people sometimes are like, what the heck is that? Because it's something that you don't even touch, but that is actually influencing all the people's lives nowadays.
We're all still wrapping our heads around what AI really is, or better, what it can really do for us in the wine world. And I mean, there's a very wide variety of applications, and we're finding about that in these days.
Nice. And are you considering to use like the AI at your winery yet, or it's something that you're still thinking about?
Well, I think in the future for data collection, where you're managing very large pools of data, definitely AI will come into play. I think there will definitely be a certain degree of formation to be done, and it will be adopted maybe gradually, but definitely I see in the future a use of AI in our business. No doubt.
And I think it's going to be pretty interesting because actually you work with biodynamic and like organic practices, both in the vineyards and at the wineries. So I could say like Col d'Arcia is sustainable, right? I mean, you really care about the environment. So it's going to be something like 360-degree reality because you're going to be organic, biodynamic, but also adopting some new technologies. So sometimes they can be good, right?
Exactly. And for what I've seen, for what we're discovering in these days, the applications of AI today are mainly in the viticulture side. And that for us is very important because the philosophy my father's instilled in me since the beginning is always remember, we make our wines in the vineyard. And obviously that's a phrase. It's to be taken with a pinch of salt for sure. But making wines in the vineyard for us means our greatest focus is in the quality of the fruit, which means once a fruit comes into the cellar, our main philosophy is minimal intervention. Nice. So we will only, my father loves saying, we are farmers, we are grape growers first and foremost, and the wine is a consequence of the best fruit we grow. Nice. So the applications in the agricultural side, in the viticulture side, are definitely something we're very interested in.
Nice. And I'm happy you were talking about your father because I think you have a pretty interesting background. So why don't you tell us something about yourself, especially like why your name is Santiago? I guess there's a reason.
Absolutely. So I actually grew up in South America.
Wow.
My father moved there when I was 1 or 2 years old, and we lived there for 10 years, so up until I was 12. And I'm a 10th generation winemaker in my family.
Wow.
So there is a very long history in the Marone Cinzano family ever since 1568 when we first planted vineyards in Piemonte. We've been vinifying and producing wines ever since then. The experience in Chile was a very interesting experience for my father. He moved there to research for the family's ties with the land. So for the bulk of my father's youth, The family company was Cinzano. And Cinzano was, of course, a very large company at the time, and a company that mainly made products with grape growers around the region in Santa Vittoria d'Alba. We would buy grapes from. So for a couple of generations, and I'm referring to my father and my grandfather, the real role of vigneron and the tie with the vineyard itself was, I wouldn't say lost, but it maybe became a bit of a secondary priority, prioritizing the commercial side and the business side and so on. So moving to Chile for my father was this desire to plant vineyard and to re-become a vigneron. And what he didn't expect was discovering biodynamics. My father didn't really know what biodynamics was before he moved to Chile. And he planted vineyards in this very isolated area of Chile, an area where I would say conventional agriculture never arrived. Definitely not intensive agriculture. And when he planted vineyards there, he obviously hired local farmers to work in the vineyard. And straight off the bat, they would tell him things like, we will not prune the vineyard this week because we're waiting for the moon to be in falling phase. Rather than they had a very advanced knowledge of composting. Of course, these farmers in this very rural area of Chile, they didn't have a biodynamics book. They didn't even know the meaning of biodynamics, but they simply treated the vineyard the way their father did and their grandfather did, and it was just passed on generation to generation. And this just happens to be a lot of practices that are perfectly in line with Steiner's principles. So really things that we discovered over time in agriculture, and like everywhere else, what worked we kept doing, what didn't work was eventually abandoned, and that's kind of the approach that Chile still had, or at least the more southern wine areas of Chile in the 1990s. So they still had this approach. So my father definitely rediscovered what a natural approach to viticulture is, what a minimal intervention approach is. And eventually in 2005, when the family moved back to Italy, when we moved back to Tuscany, and he started overseeing the Col d'Orcia operations again, it was a no-brainer for him to switch all of Col d'Orcia to fully organic certification with biodynamic practices. So today, Col d'Orcia, it's 140 hectares of vineyard, but the bigger estate, in total, it's 500 hectares of land.
It's huge.
And part of it is woodland, part of it is Mediterranean shrub, but then, of course, olive groves, the vineyards, of course, and then we produce barley. My brother has a beer line that's fully organic as well. We produce tobacco for hand-rolled cigars. So the whole estate is fully organic today.
So you produce all the delicious things that in life are.
Everything. We're ready for the apocalypse. So if anything were to happen, we're Col d'Orcia is
well,
self-sufficient.
please remember me if that happens. Like,
Absolutely.
someone interviewed me. It was nice. It was fun. So.
The gate in Col d'Orcia is always open for friends. So
Thanks so much. Wow. So you have like all these hectares, and like how many wines do you make?
Col d'Orcia currently has 13 different labels. Now, three of these are Brunello di Montalcino, or Vendemmia, the classic, Vigna Nastagio, which is a cru, and of course Poggio al Vento, our Reserva. We have two Rosso di Montalcinos, the classic, and Vigna Banditella, which has just been re-released this year after a couple years of absence. Two Super Tuscans, Olmai and Nearco, a Pinot Grigio, a Chardonnay, and we make Spezieri, which is our unoaked EGT.
Oh, interesting.
A
With what grapes?
Spezieri is mainly Sangiovese and has a splash of Ciliegio.
Oh, wow.
And for our non-Italian listeners, Ciliegia in Italian means cherry. So Ciliegio is the cherry grape. As the word says, very fruit-forward. Great grape to blend with Sangiovese to make a slightly more approachable, light style of red Tuscan wine. And of course, we also produce the Moscadello di Montalcino, which not everyone knows. This is the traditional wine of Montalcino. Centuries before Montalcino adopted Sangiovese, we had white Muscat, which eventually mutated genetically into what we know today as Moscadello di Montalcino. So it's an indigenous grape to Montalcino. About 10 producers still produce this grape, which being only in Montalcino, it's 10 producers worldwide. makes it one of the rarest and most unique wines in Italy.
It's beautiful. And what wine do you think represents you the most? If you have to pick one.
That's a good question.
Or a wine that you really feel like that's the fruit of what we do, of what we've learned in Chile.
Well, there's a few different wines in Col d'Orcia that are very, very special for the family. I would say first and foremost, it's our Rosso di Montalcino. Now, when my grandfather first arrived in Montalcino, this was 1973. This makes us one of the very first non-Tuscan families to plant Sangiovese and to produce Brunello di Montalcino. Only Brunello was being bottled in Montalcino. Now, bear in mind, Montalcino in the 1970s was still a very rural economy, quite underdeveloped wine economy still at the time. So bottling in the Bordeaux 750 glass bottles, the classic bottles that we all know, was a very expensive practice. So local families would bottle Brunello di Montalcino, but they would usually have another barrel that they would consume during the year, and that was simply the year-old wine, a wine that the family consumed that would not age for 3 years like Brunello. And it was a wine that was generally distributed in carafes or damigeons, 5-liter damigeons, which is much less expensive than the Bordeaux bottles. Now, to better this reputation of the damigeon wine, they started calling it in Montalcino Vino Rosso dai Vigneti di Brunello, which means red wine from Brunello vineyards. And my grandfather took a liking to this easier, lighter style of pure Sangiovese from Brunello vineyards, of course, and decided to bottle it in 750. And we released it in 1975, if I'm not mistaken. The first vintage was 1973. And this was, for about 10 years, it stayed with this name, red wine from Brunello vineyards, and gradually more and more Brunello producers started bottling this wine. And finally, the coronation of this project is 1985. At the time, my grandfather Alberto was president of the Italian Wine Federation, and he pushed so that Rosso di Montalcino was created as a DOC. And this is a very important moment because it's the first ever DOC in Italy given to a vineyard already subject to DOCG. So before you could make, say, Nebbiolo DOC with Barolo vineyards, you can make Rosso di Montalcino from Brunello vineyards. So we've always read this as a great recognition to the versatility of Sangiovese in Montalcino. The other wine that's very special for the family is Olmaia. Olmaia is a single vineyard, pure Cab Sauvignon, which was planted in 1985, still by my grandfather. And this is the very first vineyard of Cabernet Sauvignon planted in Montalcino.
Really?
So it's almost a 40-year-old vineyard, and it's always been unblended. And every vintage we've produced this pure Cabernet Sauvignon, which we like to say it's our family and Montalcino's expression of the most famous red grape in the world, or actually the most famous grape in the world whatsoever. And then finally, of course, Poggio al Vento. Poggio al Vento is the first vineyard my grandfather ever planted. Now, usually my father says it's the first vineyard the family ever planted in Montalcino, in Tuscany in general. But really, going back to the fact that Cinzano was a very commercial company at the time, for my grandfather personally, Poggio al Vento was the first vineyard he ever planted physically himself. So this was 1974. First Brunello vineyard we planted in Montalcino, and it's a 50-year-old vineyard today, where we're undergoing a gradual renewal, but most of the single vines are still the original plantation from 1974. And it's always been our Brunello Riserva, and it is, of course, the crown jewel of the estate and the crown jewel of the wines the family produces.
Beautiful. And I was wondering, what's your approach in winemaking? What's your winemaking philosophy? Do you prefer big oak barrels, small bricks? What's your idea of making wines to enhance the characteristic of Brunello
absolutely.
And of Cab Sauvignon, of course?
So it's a very interesting question, and very interesting that you mentioned both Sangiovese and Cabernet, because there is different approaches according to what grape it is. And focusing on Sangiovese specifically, our approach on Sangiovese, Being, in our opinion, a very delicate grape, a very subtle grape, the approach that we go for is exactly subtlety and minimal intervention. So for our Sangioveses, we use very large oaks, only exclusively neutral oak, which means the effect of the oak on the Sangiovese is extremely delicate. And this means very traditional Brunellos. So they stay in oak for a long time, but again, the oak has a very subtle effect. And the priority when we're producing Sangiovese is the selection of the best fruit. And if we work in the best manner possible in the vineyard, then our life will be made very easy in the cellar. And when it comes to Cabernet Sauvignon, it's very different. And you can see this already in the vineyard. Now, we were saying how Cabernet Sauvignon is the most famous grape in the world. And that's partly due to the fact that Cabernet Sauvignon is so versatile.
Yeah.
So it will grow in warm climates, it will grow in colder climates, wet climates, dry climates. And you can see this. 2023, last year, was a perfect example of very aggressive mildew, peronospora, all over Europe. And you can see how the Sangiovese will suffer severely, while Cabernet Sauvignon tends to be a much more resistant grape, much more resistant vine. Now, when you bring it into the cellar, this is also true. So if we take a barrique as an example, say not even a new barrique, a second-use barrique that still has a decent proportion of oaky aromas to give to the wine. For our experience, if I leave our Sangiovese in Col d'Orcia for 24 months in a barrique, when it comes out, it will be very oaky. You will taste the vanilla, the oak will be very evident, and you could run the risk of covering the Sangiovese. And when you do this with Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Sauvignon is so aromatically intense, so identifiable, that after 2 years in barrique, it's still very expressive. It's still very Olmaya, very Cab Sauvignon. So here, therefore, comes our approach of having a very delicate approach on Sangiovese. Well, on Cabernet Sauvignon, we do use barrique. My father, he says he likes to take a very traditional approach, but traditional means the tradition of where the grape is coming from. So
Makes
in
sense.
Sangiovese, large oak, neutral wood. When we talk about Cabernet Sauvignon, it's more of a Bordeaux style approach. On our Chardonnay, it's more of a Burgundy style approach.
I love the fact that you really respect the grapes you're dealing with, because basically what you're doing is making wines enhancing the peculiar characteristics of the different varieties. So that's amazing that you have these different approaches to winemaking, depending on the kind of wines you're actually making. But I was curious, all this history and tradition, do you have any new projects in mind or something new going on? What are you up to these days?
So
Especially because you're so young. I mean,
yes, and the current projects that we have do require a lot of energy and a lot of time, but fortunately there is space for thinking about the future, for thinking about what direction Montalcino and the Brunello world are going. And internally, the family has been working on a project for a good part of the last 10 years.
wow.
A project that will be released next year in January. Now, I say the family and not Col d'Orcia simply for the fact that this is a wine that we've bottled under a new entity, under a new company, and this bears the family name.
So you founded basically a new company, or you'll be
Correct.
out just with a new label? Oh, wow.
No, it's a new estate, a new company.
And was your idea, or?
It's a project I've been championing for the longest time.
Nice.
And really, it was all born probably in what is my very first memory in Montalcino. My very first
Okay.
memory in Montalcino, bear in mind, as we were saying, I grew up in South America, so most of my childhood I wasn't that familiar with Montalcino. But I took a trip to Italy with my father, and it must have been 2002 or 2003. So not one of the best vintages in the history of Montalcino. And I remember a conversation between my father and the agronomist in the vineyard, in Poggio al Vento vineyard, so really a very important vineyard for us, where they looked at each other and they said, I don't think we'll produce Poggio al Vento this year. Poggio al Vento is a wine that's only produced when the grapes from that vineyard are of exceptional quality. It's a single vineyard, so whatever it gives us tells us whether we can produce or not. And I was very young. I didn't know the wine world very well. I was probably 8 or 9, and I asked my father, why aren't we producing Poggio al Vento? And he said, because Poggio al Vento this year, just the microclimate in this single plot doesn't have the conditions for us to produce Poggio al Vento. And my next question was, why isn't Poggio al Vento produced with the best grapes that we have in the 140 hectares of vineyard that we own?
Makes sense.
Because it's a single vineyard. My father's from Piemonte. He has a lot of experience in Montalcino, 2 areas where the most iconic, the most famous historical wines are single vineyards. They are expression of one plot. So growing up in the wine industry, in the back of my head, I've always had this thought of, I want to champion this project of an itinerant selection of the best fruit of the year.
Wow.
And the desire to use the family name to label this wine was also always in the back of my head. So the wine we will release in 2025 is a 2019 vintage Brunello di Montalcino, produced and bottled by Conti Marone Cinzano, and this is the name of the new estate. And the wine is called Lot 1. Wow. Lot 1 is quite self-explanatory. It's simply the best lot of the season.
Okay.
But rather than being a single vineyard, during harvest time, we search for the very best fruit, the very best Sangiovese. And of course, every vintage, there's an interactive map, there's a description of the climate of the vintage, how it played into the selection of grapes, what plot we chose, and the characteristics of that single plot, and how it ties into that vintage's climate.
So if that wine doesn't taste really good, you can all blame it to Santiago, because it's his idea, and I'm sure he's going to be the one who's going to select, not even grape by grape, by berry,
exactly,
that actually goes into that wine. Wow, but sounds so interesting. I really hope to be able to taste it, because it sounds something, I mean, that's unique, and that's really, I mean, it requires a lot of effort, because it's not saying it's a single vineyard that just go there to that plot and collect the grapes and make the wine. No, you're just traveling around 140 hectares of vineyards to select the best grapes. But because you have like all the vineyards in the Brunello appellation?
Yes, so all
so
the
basically
vineyards,
you can do also all Brunello.
Correct.
Okay.
And as things are today, part of these vineyards, of course, actually most of these vineyards today are still in Col d'Orcia, but we've been planting now for a number of years vineyards in the Conti Marone Cinzano soils, which are of course separate. It's still all in the southern side of Montalcino, but it's 2 different estates. And as time goes on, we'll have more and more vineyards to select from, and of course.
So now you have vineyards in Tuscany, right? Piedmont was the past, basically, where your father actually comes from. But the vineyards are all in Col d'Orcia, Brunello di Montalcino, Tuscany. Okay, nice. I thought you still have something maybe in Piedmont going on. Or...
No, land in Piemonte, not anymore. No.
Okay. Well, and oh gosh, I have so many questions I'd like to ask you, because it all sounds so interesting, and all the passion you actually have in making wines and carrying on this family tradition. But one thing really makes me curious, because you're really working hard in the vineyards to do less, to have more quality grapes, basically. How are you dealing with this climate change? Because everyone is talking about climate change, and what varieties are coping better, some others struggle a bit. So what's your opinion about that?
So we're definitely seeing very particular vintages, very particular climate. Most part of the history of Italian winemaking, you had a certain degree of predictability between different vintages. What we've seen in the past 10 years is, just speaking about my experience specifically, I've been in Col d'Orcia for 8 years now. So 2024 is my 8th harvest. And in the past 8 years, we've seen the warmest year on record, the driest year on record, but also the latest frost on record.
Wow.
The rainiest autumn on record. So really, the climate is definitely changing. For me, the best word is climatic unpredictability. So we definitely have extremes, And every single vintage, we need to be prepared to see something that we've never seen before. And unfortunately, that is a reality. Now, in Coldorcia, we've been undergoing research in terms of clonal selection to adapt to a changing climate, with which we've had a good degree of success. Vigna Anastasio, or Cru Brunello in Coldorcia, was planted after almost 20 years of clonal selection research, which very simply means in dry vintages, warm vintages, we tend to isolate the single vines that are doing particularly well and use that genetic material to replicate it in the future vineyards.
Wow.
So really, Anastasio is a perfect example of how we're choosing clones that will adapt to a changing climate. Now, the parallel project, Conti Marone Cinzano, the Lot 1 Brunello di Montalcino, builds upon this experience in the sense that climatic unpredictability means that the concept of single vineyard and of cru, while still being extremely valid, is also a concept that is becoming more and more challenging.
Yeah, makes sense.
Because Poggio al Vento was planted in 1974, and up until 15 years ago, year in, year out, it gave us the best Sangiovese in the estate. Now, going back to the past 8 vintages where I've been in Coldorcia, the past 8 vintages, we've virtually had the best fruit, the best Sangiovese come from 8 different plots. Exactly for the reason that we have climate that we've never seen before every vintage. So the idea of having an itinerant selection and using a different plot according to the year's climate every year is more and more rewarding. And in my opinion, it's becoming more rewarding than being tied down to a cru or a single plot. So in this sense, the Lot 1 project definitely ties into what we're thinking and what we're doing to adapt to a changing climate.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, not focusing just on the single vineyard, but just focusing on the best plots that I actually have. And you are very brave, because it's much easier, you know, for people just to say, hey, this is my single vineyard, this is my best plot. But as you said, maybe 1 year, now is the best plot. But for other 8 to 10 years can be this one, that one, or another one. So it's really brave, and I think, as you said, really rewarding. So,
and I find it especially interesting to be able, yes, to choose the best fruit of the season in different plots, but to narrate this, to tell the story. So every vintage, it's not going to be only, this is the plot we chose. No, it's, this is the climate of the year, therefore, this was the best plot, and these were the characteristics, which makes the consumer understand much better why we choose the grapes we choose and how vineyard growing ties into a climate of a certain season. So that's very interesting. It is brave in Montalcino, definitely. It's not an unheard of approach if you look at Napa Valley, if you look at Bordeaux. However, if you focus on Piemonte and Montalcino, which are the bulk of my family's experience, it's definitely a new approach. It's definitely quite innovative in that sense.
Well, that's beautiful. I love to stay here talking to you for hours, but you know, we have to rush for other appointments here at Wine to Wine. So, Santiago, thank you so very much.
Thank you so much.
It's been a huge pleasure talking to you, and thanks for your time, because I know you're quite busy these days, but yeah, it's been great. And good luck on your new projects.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here, and I'll wait for you in Montalcino.
All right, have you heard, guys? So look for Santiago Marone Cinzano in Coldorcia to just reach out to him and plan a visit to Montalcino. And remember, they're getting ready for the apocalypse. So stay tuned. Ciao!
Grazie for being with me today and listening to The Next Generation on the Italian Wine Podcast. Alla prossima! Cin cin!